Previously on Lossano and Friends.
Kaempfer. You have a story about Larry Lujack.
So Larry, I met Larry when I was a young broadcaster. I was with Brent Miller one day, and we happened to be driving near Larry's house.
Yeah.
And he lived in Palatine at that time. And he said, well, let's go in and say hi to Larry. And Larry was in the backyard. He had just rescued...
Larry doesn't seem like a friendly person that you just pop in on.
No.
Okay.
No. So he was in the backyard. He had just rescued a baby squirrel. And he had it in a little cage. And he was nursing it, nursing this baby squirrel. And Brant and I just sat there and watched him. And every 3-4 minutes, Larry would say something, and we'd go, oh, okay, Larry. And then we left. That was the time that I met him.
Right.
Now, years later.
He was breastfeeding it?
He couldn't fit it in the cage, but Now, years later, John Landecker was on Windy City Live.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah. And we decided to surprise him with Larry Lujack, live from Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Right.
So I had to track him down for them. Yeah. And I called Larry on the phone, and I started having conversations with Larry. And Larry now, and at that time, was very friendly, and he started calling me at home like 3-4 times a week just to say hi. Yeah. We became pals.
Yeah.
And, my son would answer the phone, and he'd say, hello, you know who I am, kid? And my son would say, you're Larry Lujack? I'm worried about you, kid. That sort of thing. How you doing? About average. It was always the same thing. But in the end, we became pals, and we probably talked, I'd say, 10 or 15 times on the phone. He never mentioned to me one single time that he was dying of cancer.
Right.
Never brought up that he was sick or anything. Yeah. He sent me a picture of himself wearing a Elvis shirt, like a big picture of Elvis. Yeah. And then one day, the news is that he had passed away.
Well, he didn't like a big deal about him, and he knew if that got out, they were made a big deal out of him.
Yeah, I always thought charming and delightful old Uncle Lair was sarcastic.
Yeah.
But it actually was true. He really was a nice guy.
Yeah. He did come into Chicago once for photos or something, and because Larry wears jeans and like flannels and all that, and he looks a little disheveled.
We did.
So we were producing the Melissa Foreman show, and Melissa's like, there's a homeless guy roaming the hallway.
Oh, are you kidding?
And I'm like, what? And so I go out there, and I'm like, that's Larry.
She almost called security on Larry Lujack.
But he was pretty rough looking. That day.
Right.
He was rough looking 40 years ago.
I was just saying, in his peak, when he was making a lot of money, he still would buy like $12 jeans. That's how he was. If you're listening to this podcast, I'm assuming that you know how to get us, but in case you don't, here's Fred Winston to tell you how.
Lossano and Friends. Available on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network, Apple iTunes, Stitcher Smart Radio app, and on Lossano.com.
That's just in case somehow you accidentally tuned in. You can't even tune in. If you accidentally ran into our podcast.
If you're dialing around the internet.
If you're dialing around on the interwebs.
Yeah.
I don't know how these things work. So, whatever.
Get more Lossano and Friends now on Lossano.com.